Stan, let's go back to you here. And so, we're always kind of studying denial of service attacks. This one gives a little new twist, at least from my perspective.
Yeah. Well, then another thing I'm always studying is use of proxies and things like that, and proxies in general. So this is where the two worlds collide. An article, I think, in CSO Online talked about how, I guess there was a study conducted a few years ago where some of the DDoS attacks, application-based DDoS attacks, were coming from proxy nodes. For example, one such would be like a Tor exit node or something like that, or other anonymously available free proxies or even maybe paid proxies. But now, when they've done the study, they're saying that it's maybe as much as 20%, so a fifth of all of these application layer DDoS attacks are happening through the use of proxies. And I think when we were preparing the report today for the internet weather, I think we have something there on the statistics on the use and scanning for proxies and things like that. But it certainly explains a little bit on, people are always trying to find proxies. What's the reason for that? Maybe they're trying to have more anonymous browsing of the internet, or maybe they're trying to, commit these kinds of DDoS attacks using the proxies. So it's an interesting article. There's some statistics there. Something like, I think they were saying 40% of the proxy traffic comes from actually Tor exit nodes. And then of that, 65 uses a specific type of attack over Tor or a specific type of tool over Tor.
It's Tor Hammer,
I think so, yeah.
Right. So when you say application level attacks, can you distinguish what makes it application versus
That's a good point.
else?
I guess that refers to the network stack. So there's some attacks where you just send a packet and it doesn't matter if the receiving, it doesn't matter if you've established a connection. It just, the packet goes and it does its thing, and that by itself may cause a DOS attack, or there could be an attack where you're just overwhelming the bandwidth or something like that, or some of these, basically a bandwidth-based attack. And other application-based attacks is when you connect through the network, so you establish the TCP session. And that's probably the only kinds of attacks that can use a proxy, really, because you got to connect to the proxy, and the proxy has to connect to the application. So it'll be like a web server or something like that. And one type of attack might be, you connect to the web server and you wait a little bit more than a usual user would before sending packets or information. And if you do that enough, there's potential for resource usage and a denial of service.
So if you're going through a proxy, you're not going to be able to control the TCP session setup itself.
Right.
So you wouldn't be able to do a SYN attack, for example.
Right.
And we talk a lot about reflection attacks. That's probably out of scope in this case, in most circumstances anyway. But it's a case where once you've set up that TCP session, you can just send a packet.
Right.
Because the proxy is just relaying packets at that point, right? And then send a packet, and then send a packet. And so it holds the session up, and if you can do that thousands of times, it would tend to create a resource exhaustion, perhaps in the firewall on the front end of an application where it's trying to keep state, or on the application itself where it's trying to keep state of the sessions themselves.
And you're also building some sort of anonymity around yourself being, not exposing your own IP address space. You're coming in through somewhere else, and if there was some sort of investigation, it would always point back to these proxies. So there's something there for the attackers to hide their presence. Actually, it made me think, just while we're talking, about another type of attack that was using proxies, where this doesn't exist anymore, but it was an interesting twist. People were able to log in, I think it was to also web proxies, but when they issued the connect command, they were able to connect not over port 443 like you would normally do, or port 80. They would connect over like port 25 or these other ports and actually send spam via like a SSL proxy.
Right.
So the use of proxies has been around for a long time to enable this kind of malicious activity.
Yeah, it's interesting the increase here. I think generally speaking, we've noticed that denial of service attacks have gone up significantly. There's been a lot of commercialization, and I kind of wonder to what extent some of this activity is related to commercialization as well. I think they also mentioned how inexpensive it is effectively to be able to generate generate a lot of sources of the activity, and there can be subtleties that you can build into it that each of the proxies is just a little bit different, or different proxy services or different proxies if you're just scanning around and finding them, that might make it a little more difficult for the mitigators to be able to generate a signature that blocks all of it or be able to track it. So also attributes that from attacker's point of view, a good thing, something that the mitigation services will need to be aware of to be able to do a good job doing that mitigation.
It's also a little harder to detect in general if you're looking from a network standpoint. I mean, basically you're seeing very, very low volume of traffic where you typically expect massive amounts of traffic. That would be your first tip off that you're under a DDoS attack. With a situation like this, if you're not monitoring the processes on your server, you're not going to know there's even an attack going on until your admins call you up and say, we've got this problem, we have no idea how to deal with it. All of a sudden, all of the threads in Apache are completely pegged. What is this?
Yeah, it may not be a full network resource exhaustion that occurs.
And it most likely won't be.
Right. Yeah, I can't even tell you how many times I've run into situations where folks aren't really paying attention to what's happening on their network until something gets pegged.
Yep.
Something goes down and they start investigating, well, the CPU's pegged or our network's running at 90%, and then everything's an attack after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it used to be that stuff was there, but they didn't realize it was there because it was, there may be something that kicked it over the edge, and then everything's an attack after that. So it takes a little while to get used to what the rhythm is and what types of activity you normally see that just aren't normal. I mean, not things that you would expect to see on a network, but they're certainly there. So all good things. The bad stuff's not good things, but good things to be aware of.